Hello, welcome back to the blog. Today, doing an excellent, incredible read. Very short, very easy, very inspiring. It's called The Bulletproof George Washington by David Barton. Now, I don't know if you know David Barton. He's incredible. He does the Wall Builders, founder of Wall Builders. Does an incredible job. I came across this book. It's been 20 years almost, 18 years ago, 19 years ago, and just was dumbfounded that I didn't know this. How could I go through public education that's funded by tax dollars from my federal government and not have read the story or even heard of the story about George Washington and how he's bulletproof? It's because we've fallen off the ledge. We can't talk about the Bulletproof George Washington because it's impossible to talk about that, to talk about what happened to him and exclude God. And because of the separation of church and state, which is not a principle. I don't know if you know, but the separation of church and state is simply that the church or the state can't dictate what church. It didn't say there's no church, because they were fighting the Church of England, and you were required to be a member of the Church of England. And anyways, that's a whole different tangent. But it's impossible to study the founding of America without studying it correctly, just reading anything that they wrote. Because the first time I'd ever read anything that they wrote, I was in my 20s, okay? And this was self-study. But once you read something they wrote, they talk about God and providence and their maker and the laws of human nature and nature's God and everything else, because they believed in a supreme being, because there is a supreme being. And he's involved in the very acts and daily lives of men. So, that's my sermon. Back to the Bulletproof George Washington. This is a story about George Washington, a true story, very true, during the French and Indian War. Now, the French and Indian War was the French were trying to take over the English, and they wanted the English colonies, and they had gotten with the Indians, or the Native Americans, to fight the English, okay? And this was a big cause of the Revolutionary War, actually, because of the cost of the war. So, at the time, George Washington was I forgot. He was under Braddock. I believe he was a general or colonel. He was a colonel, but General Braddock was in charge of this expedition. Now, if you remember, if you studied, the one thing I did learn in public school was that the redcoats would line up, and they would be very, and then the Americans would hide behind trees and stones, and they just decimate them. They would just take over this huge enemy, because they just used their mind. They used common sense. I'm not going to march in the middle of, with these bright red coats on and get shot. We're going to hide behind stuff and do whatever we can to protect ourselves and win the war. So this is how English warfare was, and they walked in there, they marched in there, and they were getting killed. Okay, I'm not going to go into the whole details, but it was a bloodbath. General Braddock was killed, and I mean, I should have looked up the numbers, but it was like Henry V. If you read Henry V by Shakespeare or studied that battle with France, I mean, it was like 10-1. It was just a slaughter, totally a landslide slaughter on one side, and hardly anyone got hurt on the other side. This was the case in this French and Indian battle. Washington, that's just tremendous. He's fighting and he's following orders. So let me find this spot real quick. I don't know where it's at. I didn't prepare as good as I should, but I did find this spot I want to talk about. So basically, they're fighting, and he's commanded everyone to kill everyone on horseback, the chief, Indian chief, because he knows that the people on horseback are the leaders, and he wants them gone. And this is some years later, they found the chief, and he wanted to meet Washington. And he comes up and says, I am the chief ruler of my tribes. My influence extends to the waters of the Great Lakes and to the far blue mountains. I have traveled a long way, along a weary path, that I might see the young warrior of the great battle. He comes all this way because he wants to meet Washington. It was on the day when the white man's blood mixed with the streams of our forest that I first beheld this chief, and he's referring to chief as Washington. I called my young men and said, "Mark yon tall and daring warrior." He purposely pointed out Washington. See that guy? He says, "He is not of the redcoat tribe. He hath an Indian's wisdom, and his warriors fight as we do. Himself is alone exposed." He says he's acting different. The other ones he's exposed because he's out amongst them. Quick, let your aim be certain, and he dies. Kill Washington on the horse. Our rifles were leveled, rifles which, but for you, knew not how to miss. 'Twas all in vain. A power mightier far than we shielded you. Seeing you were under the special guardianship of the Great Spirit, we immediately ceased to fire at you. He said, we realized the Great Spirit was protecting you. God was protecting you, and so we stopped firing at you. I am old, and soon shall be gathered to the great council fire of my fathers in the land of shades. But ere I go, there is something bid me speaks in the voice of prophecy. Listen, the Great Spirit protects that man, pointing at Washington, and guides his destinies. He will become the chief of nations, and a people yet unborn will hail him as the founder of a mighty empire. I am come to pay homage to the man who is the particular favorite of heaven, and who can never die in battle. Isn't that incredible? Washington was an incredible man. He wasn't a god, because people have the tendency to deify humans, right? Or to tear them down. And I know that Jefferson's been torn down a ton, and Franklin. Washington's not as much, but some people I'm sure do. But he was an incredible man. I've studied a bunch of his life. I'm thoroughly impressed. Through this battle, I think he had 3 or 4 horses shot out from under him. He had 4 or 5 bullet holes in his coat, and he wasn't hit once. God needed George Washington, I believe, to found this nation of America. Anyways, the Bulletproof George Washington, it is an excellent book, excellent read. It's very short. It's like 50 pages. And it's from David Barton, and it's very well worth reading. And if you don't believe in God, then you probably won't want to read it because it's full of that stuff. Obviously, this post is. But thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this post, if it was helpful, please pass it on. Tell a friend about it. And you can join our email. Join our email database so you can get sent updates and different things we're doing. And thanks again. Have a great day.